Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of AI in Space Tech. I'm Dimitris, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about more technical aspects regarding the deep learning Tensorflow library. So Tensorflow is a library developed by Google for actually implementing deep learning models, and currently it's a state-of-the-art library, very heavily supported, very heavily developed for building deep learning models. And of course, with this great power that it contains, there are also some difficulties. So the problem actually with which many people I discuss with face with TensorFlow is that a little bit hard to understand exactly how these computational graphs work. The problem actually lies in the fact that you actually build first your model, and then you initiate a session, and then you execute it. So you cannot check actually the values of your variables before the execution, and this could be a problem sometimes with debugging, for example, where you would actually want to stop in a particular point within your code and check the values of your tensor within a particular point. But this is not easily possible with TensorFlow, because first you have to execute the graph, and then you can actually get the values of your variables. So where is it? So if you would look also in the official TensorFlow documentation, you would see exactly that first of all you actually create the variable, maybe you create a computation over your tensor, and then after you have defined it, you initiate the session, and then you run it, and then actually you can get the actual values of your variables. This could be a little bit problematic, not in these very simple examples that you more or less know what to expect, but when you really actually have very big models and you try to debug them, and you would like to see on particular points how your model performs. So what actually the people of TensorFlow did was that they developed a very, very interesting mode that it called EagerExecution, and within it you can actually do standard Python-like debugging with any debugging tool you familiar with, and this is amazing. So of course there is some documentation here which is quite good, but I wanted to do something simpler for people who may start now using TensorFlow. So I built myself a few small tutorial codes where you can actually check them, and you can understand this eager execution mode much easier. So here is the code, and first of all I build a simple example where I am actually not using the eager execution mode. So in the standard mode of TensorFlow, as I said before, sorry, this is actually the eager execution mode, so I wouldn't like that, but I want this one. So in the standard mode, we can import our debugging tool, and we can set our breakpoints, but it won't be very much help. So what you do actually is you define your variables here, and then you can print their type. And if you print their type, you will see that they're just standard TensorFlow tensors, which means you cannot get the values of your tensors or of an operation such as variable C, where we actually multiply variable A and B. So I cannot get the values of C even though I have write down that I want to perform this operation. So to get the values of C, I have to initiate the session here and then execute the graph, and only here I can get the output so the actual value of variable C, of variable B, or variable A. So of course this is just a simple example, but think of something very large, maybe a model with 100 layers, which is heavily used in deep learning, and you want to check a particular activation function, let's say to layer 58. This would be really hard if you would have first to execute the whole graph and then somehow be able to check this value within this huge graph. So with the standard new tool, which is called EagerExecution mode, you can actually now perform standard Python-like debugging using standard breakpoints. So for example here, I'm importing also NumPy, and I'm importing PDB, which is just standard debugging tool for Python, and then I enable here in the beginning the EagerExecution mode. And you have to do that in the very beginning of your code, otherwise the code will complain when you run it, and it will actually give you a message that you have to enable the EagerExecution mode in the beginning of your graph. So first I enable the execution mode, the EagerExecution mode, and then I'm doing exactly the same definition of variables as before. And here in where I print, you can actually print and get the actual values of the tensor. So you don't have first to execute the graph to see your values. And if you check out the type of the tensor, it will tell you that it's a eager tensor type, which is kind of interesting intermediate type of tensor between standard TensorFlow tensors or NumPy, which is actually the best way for the most people to check values, maybe plot diagrams, I don't know, do any kind of operation. So if you check the type, it's an eager type tensor, but you can actually see the values here. But then you can just say NumPy array to any variable you want, and immediately you have a conversion to an actual NumPy array. So you can do any kind of check practically very, very easily within your code with standard debugging tools such as PDB I'm using here in the end if someone wants to check the variables. So this is just the very simple examples I build, and of course I have uploaded them in GitHub, so you can actually go download the code and play with it yourself. Then you can go probably and read the official documentation, but sometimes the people there, they of course they have a lot of work, and the documentation they write, it's not always so clear for the very beginners. So the documentation is interesting, but I found it a little bit confusing for someone who is just starting with TensorFlow. That's why I created these two small codes. Lastly, before I finish, I would like to also mention a very, very interesting presentation I found online, actually written by this guy, Jong-wook Choi. I hope I said it correct, where he actually shows all the standard ways of debugging within TensorFlow without actually using the EagerExecution mode. This is very, very interesting. If you don't really want to use the tool that I just presented, and you just want to go with a standard TensorFlow mode. And he has a very, very detailed presentation on all the different ways where you can actually do debugging. Also, he mentions NumPy, then he says how this is possible in TensorFlow, and he actually shows all the different ways. Here, for example, he says by running a session, by using the TensorFlow print command, using TensorBoard. He said these are the basics, and then he has even more advanced like step-by-step debugger and so on and so forth. You can read the presentation on your own, but anyhow, I found myself the EagerExecution mode very helpful for debugging large models that I've been using. And with this, I come to the end. I hope you find these thing actually helpful for you. I hope you learned something, and please give us some feedback. Subscribe, give us the thumbs up, and don't forget, if you subscribe, to click on the small bell button so you are updated every time I make a video. Feel free to write me a comment or tell me what would you like to see in following videos, and if you would like to see something else regarding TensorFlow or any other aspect of deep learning and space generally, I would be very happy to do it for you. So with this, goodbye guys, and see you soon. Bye bye.